The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They were an alliance of 7 ancient species, each one older than human civilization itself. They had conquered thousands of worlds. They had destroyed hundreds of species. They had never, not once in their long history, met an enemy they could not crush. When their sensors detected the first faster-than-light ship coming from a small yellow star, they were curious. When they traced it back to a blue planet called Earth, they were amused. When they studied humanity and saw how young they were, how small their territory was, how primitive their weapons seemed, they made a decision. They would do what they had always done. They would send an ultimatum. Ambassador received the message aboard the diplomatic station orbiting Mars. He was 63 years old, a veteran of 3 colonial wars, and he had seen enough death to last several lifetimes. His hair was gray now, his face lined with scars both visible and invisible, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind was still clear. He read the message once, then he read it again, then he started to laugh. His aide, a young lieutenant named, looked at him with concern. She had never seen the ambassador laugh like this. It was not a happy sound. "Sir," she asked, "what does it say?" Handed her the tablet. The message was simple and direct. The Galactic Concord demanded the complete and unconditional surrender of all human territories. All military vessels were to be destroyed. All weapons were to be handed over. Humanity would become a protectorate species, which meant they would have no rights, no freedom, and no future. The message ended with a warning. If humanity did not comply within 30 standard days, the Concord would begin systematic extinction protocols. Every human being on every world would be killed. There would be no exceptions. There would be no mercy. "They cannot be serious," said her voice shaking. "They are completely serious," replied. "They have done this before, many times. To them we are nothing. We are insects. We are a problem to be solved." "What do we do?" Stood and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Mars, red and ancient, covered with human cities that had taken 200 years to build. Beyond Mars, he could see the stars. Somewhere out there, a fleet of alien warships was already preparing to destroy everything humanity had ever created. "We fight," he said. "We do what humans have always done when someone threatens our children. We fight." The response was sent within the hour. It was even shorter than the original message. It said simply, "We do not negotiate with those who threaten our children. Come and try." The Concord received the response with disbelief. No species had ever refused them before. Some had begged. Some had tried to negotiate. Some had simply gone silent as they waited for death, but no one had ever told them to come and try. The Concord fleet assembled in record time. 3,000 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They carried weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand nuclear fire. Their crews were professional soldiers who had trained for centuries. Their commanders were veterans of 100 subjugation campaigns. They entered human space expecting fear. They expected desperate transmissions begging for mercy. They expected to see human ships fleeing in terror. They expected, at most, a small and futile resistance that would be crushed within hours. What they found was silence. Earth was dark. The great cities that had once blazed with light were empty and cold. The orbital stations were abandoned. The defense platforms floated dead in space, their weapons cold, their crews gone. The fleet commander, an ancient creature named who had personally overseen the extinction of 12 species, studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. 8 billion humans had lived on Earth. Where had they gone? He ordered scans of the entire system. Mars was empty. The asteroid colonies were abandoned. The stations around Jupiter and Saturn were dark. Every human settlement, every city, every outpost, all of them were empty. It was impossible. No species could evacuate that many people that quickly. The logistics alone would take years. But the evidence was clear. Humanity had vanished. Declared victory. The humans had clearly seen the fleet coming and fled into deep space, where they would eventually die of starvation or be hunted down at leisure. He ordered his forces to occupy the empty worlds and claim them for the conquered. The occupation troops landed on Earth first. They walked through empty streets and entered empty buildings. They found homes with food still on tables, vehicles with engines still warm, hospitals with patients simply gone from their beds. It was as if 8 billion people had stood up and walked into the void. Then they found the messages. Every screen on Earth, every speaker, every communication device, all of them were playing the same message on loop. It was a simple recording, just text and audio, no images. The voice was calm and clear, speaking in the conquered's own trade language. "We do not surrender, we do not forget, we are coming." The occupation troops reported the message too. He dismissed it as a desperate bluff. The humans were clearly trying to frighten the conquered into leaving. It would not work. The conquered did not know fear. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. A supply convoy disappeared on the edge of the system. No distress signal, no debris, just gone. A patrol fleet reported contact with unknown vessels, then went silent. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but floating wreckage and bodies. An outpost on one of Jupiter's moons exploded without warning. The investigation found evidence of sabotage, but no saboteurs. Ordered increased security. He sent out more patrols. He fortified every position, but the attacks continued. They were small at first, just a ship here, a station there, but they were precise. They were professional, and they were completely unexpected. The conquered had never fought an enemy like this. Their previous conquests had been straightforward. They would arrive with overwhelming force, crush any resistance, and occupy the territory. The enemy would fight or flee or surrender, but they would always be visible. They would always be predictable. Humanity was none of these things. On the last day of the first month of occupation, received a transmission from a source he could not identify. It was the same voice from the messages on Earth, calm and clear and utterly without fear. "You came to our home," the voice said. "You threatened our children, you thought we would bow, you thought we would break. You were wrong." The transmission ended with coordinates. When sent ships to investigate, they found the wreckage of his flagship sister ship, which had been on patrol 3 light-years away. The entire crew was dead. The ship's computer had been wiped clean except for one file. It was a list of every officer in the conquered fleet, with their names, their ranks, their home addresses, and the names of their families. The message was clear. The humans knew everything. They could strike anywhere, and they were just getting started. Who had never known fear in his long life, felt something cold settle in his chest. He was beginning to understand that the conquered had made a terrible mistake. They had threatened humanity expecting submission. They had found something else entirely. 3 years had passed since the conquered invaded human space. 3 years of searching, hunting, and dying. The greatest military force in galactic history had failed to find a single human settlement. They had failed to capture a single human prisoner. They had failed to win a single decisive battle. And they were losing. Admiral commanded the human resistance from a place no sane species would ever look. Her mobile base floated inside the outer layer of a dying star, hidden within the burning plasma that would vaporize any normal ship in seconds. Human engineers had spent decades developing shields that could withstand such temperatures. They had built this base knowing that one day they might need to hide from a galaxy that wanted them dead. That day had come. Was 54 years old, small and thin, with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had been a combat pilot in her youth, then a captain, then a commodore. When the conquered came, she had been chosen to lead humanity's military response. It was not an honor she had wanted, but she had accepted it because someone had to. Her fleet was small compared to the Conquered's thousands of ships. She had only 200 vessels, most of them converted civilian transports and hastily built frigates. But every single one had been designed for one purpose: to hurt the enemy and disappear before they could respond. "They think we are hiding because we are afraid," told her captains during a strategy meeting. The holographic display showed the current state of the war: red dots for conquered forces, blue dots for human strikes. The red dots outnumbered the blue by 100 to 1. But the blue dots were everywhere, scattered across conquered space like seeds in the wind. Let them think that. Fear makes them stupid. Arrogance makes them predictable. For decades before the invasion, humanity had studied the Conquered in secret. They had intercepted communications, analyzed technology, and learned everything they could about their future enemy. They knew that the Conquered had not fought a real war in 10,000 years. They knew that Conquered officers were politicians first and soldiers second. They knew that Conquered ships were built for comfort and display, not for actual combat. Most importantly, they knew that the Conquered had never faced an enemy who refused to play by their rules. Captain led the first major strike against Conquered infrastructure. He was 31 years old, tall and quiet, with the patient eyes of a hunter. His task force consisted of 12 frigates, each one carrying a crew of 20. Against them stood the largest shipyard in Conquered space, defended by 200 warships and orbital fortresses that could destroy planets. Any normal fleet would have attacked from outside the defensive perimeter, trying to fight through layer after layer of protection. Did something different. He had his ships fold space in a way that Conquered scientists considered mathematically impossible, appearing directly inside the station's shields. The Conquered defenders had no time to react. One moment space was empty. The next moment, 12 human frigates were among them, firing at point-blank range. Ships moved like dancers, weaving between the massive Conquered vessels, targeting engines and weapons and shield generators with surgical precision. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, the shipyard was a burning ruin. 40 Conquered warships had been destroyed, had lost 2 frigates and 37 people. It was a victory but did not celebrate. She could not afford to. For every shipyard they destroyed, the Conquered had 100 more. For every ship they killed, 1,000 waited to take its place. Humanity could not win this war through force alone. They had to break the Conquered's will to fight. The Ghost War continued. Human strike teams appeared without warning, hit their targets, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They attacked supply lines and communication relays. They destroyed fuel depots and ammunition stores. They assassinated officers and sabotaged equipment. They were everywhere and nowhere, an enemy that could not be seen, could not be predicted, could not be stopped. The psychological effect was devastating. Conquered soldiers began to see humans in every shadow. They reported attacks that never happened and enemies that did not exist. Officers refused assignments in human space, preferring disgrace to death. Entire crews rather than patrol the dark zones where human ships hunted. Lieutenant led one of the most effective strike teams in the resistance. She was 26 years old, small and fierce, with a talent for finding weaknesses that others missed. Her team specialized in infiltration, landing on Conquered stations disguised as maintenance workers or refugees, then destroying critical systems from within. On one mission, his team infiltrated the Conquered's main communication hub for an entire sector. They spent 3 weeks inside, mapping the facility, identifying targets, and waiting for the perfect moment. When they finally struck, they did not just destroy the hub. They replaced its transmissions with human propaganda, broadcasting messages of defiance and hope to every world in the sector. "You are not alone," the messages said. "The Conquered can be beaten. Humanity stands with you." Those messages reached species that had been conquered by the Conquered thousands of years ago. Species that had forgotten what freedom meant. Species that had believed resistance was impossible. For the first time they began to wonder if things could be different. The conquered tried to respond. They sent their best admirals, their largest fleets, their most advanced weapons, but nothing worked. They could not find the human bases. They could not predict human attacks. They could not understand an enemy that fought without rules, without honor, without any of the conventions that had governed galactic warfare for 10,000 years. By the end of the third year, the conquered had lost over 1,000 ships. Their economy was struggling under the strain of the war. 2 of the 7 elder species had withdrawn from the alliance, fortifying their home systems against an enemy they could not see. The remaining 5 argued constantly about strategy, each one blaming the others for their failures. Admiral watched these developments with grim satisfaction. The plan was working. Humanity was too small to defeat the conquered in open battle, but they did not need to. They just needed to make the war too expensive, too painful, too terrifying to continue. "We are not trying to win," told her officers. "We are trying to survive, and the best way to survive is to make them afraid. Make them so afraid of fighting us that they decide peace is better than war." She looked at the holographic display, at the scattered blue dots that represented human forces spread across a hostile galaxy. They were few. They were far from home. They were fighting an enemy with 1,000 times their resources. But they were winning. Somewhere out there, the conquered was learning a lesson that no species had ever taught them before. They were learning that some enemies cannot be conquered. Some enemies cannot be broken. Some enemies will fight until the last breath, the last ship, the last drop of blood. Humanity was such an enemy, and the galaxy would never forget it. 5 years into the war, the galactic conquered was breaking apart. The 7 elder species that had ruled the stars together for 12,000 years were now fighting among themselves. 2 had already left the alliance. The remaining 5 blamed each other for every failure, every loss, every embarrassment. And humanity was about to make things much worse. Commander stood on the bridge of her carrier, the Indomitable, and studied the holographic map floating before her. It showed the heart of conquered space, the most heavily defended region in the galaxy. At its center sat Conquered Prime, the capital world where the elder species had gathered to rule their empire. No enemy had ever attacked Conquered Prime. The very idea was considered impossible. The planet was protected by 17 layers of defensive perimeters, each one capable of stopping an entire invasion fleet. Thousands of warships patrolled its space. Orbital fortresses ringed it like a crown of iron and fire. Was going to attack it anyway. She was 33 years old, the youngest flag officer in human history. She had risen through the ranks during the Ghost War, leading strike after strike against impossible targets. Her superiors said she was brilliant. Her enemies said she was insane. She preferred to think of herself as creative. "The plan is simple," she told her officers. "We are going to fly directly into the heart of enemy territory, past all their defenses, and attack their capital. We are going to show the entire galaxy that the masters of the stars can bleed." Her executive officer, a grizzled veteran named, shook his head slowly. He had fought alongside for 3 years. He had learned to trust her instincts, but this plan seemed like suicide. "Commander," he said, "we have 47 ships. They have thousands. Even if we somehow get through the perimeters, we cannot possibly hold the planet. What is the point?" Smiled, it was not a comforting expression. "We are not trying to hold the planet," she said. "We are not even trying to destroy it. We are trying to prove something. For 12,000 years, the conquered has told the galaxy that they are invincible. They have told conquered species that resistance is futile. They have told everyone that their power cannot be challenged." She pointed at the holographic image of Conquered Prime, a beautiful blue world covered with the palaces and monuments of the elder species. "We are going to prove them wrong. We are going to show every slave, every subject, every conquered people in this galaxy that the conquered can be hurt, and we are going to broadcast it live." The fleet departed the next morning. 47 ships, carrying 3,000 human soldiers flying into certain death, or so the conquered believed. The journey took 6 weeks. Ships moved carefully, using the cover of nebulae and asteroid fields, avoiding patrols and sensor stations. They were like ghosts, slipping through the darkness toward their target. The conquered knew they were coming. Their intelligence services had detected unusual activity in human space. Their commanders had warned that an attack was imminent, but they could not believe the target was Conquered Prime. It was simply too crazy, too impossible, too human. Fleet reached the first defensive perimeter on a quiet morning. The conquered defenders were not prepared. They expected any attack to come from outside, to try to break through their lines with overwhelming force. Instead, ships appeared from within a cargo convoy that had been infiltrated weeks earlier. The first perimeter fell in minutes. The second lasted slightly longer. By the time the conquered commanders understood what was happening, fleet was already through the third layer of defenses. The Battle of Conquered Prime lasted 6 hours. It was the most watched event in galactic history. Had arranged for her ships to broadcast everything on every channel in conquered space. Billions of beings watched as 47 human vessels fought their way through defensive lines that were supposed to be impenetrable. They watched as human pilots flew impossible maneuvers, dodging fire that should have destroyed them, striking targets that should have been untouchable. They watched as the Indomitable, battered and burning but still fighting, broke through the final defensive line and hung in orbit above the conquered council chambers. Opened a channel. She knew that every being in 300 star systems was watching, every slave, every subject, every conquered people who had been told that resistance was futile. "You threatened our extinction," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, despite the fires burning on her bridge and the blood running down her face. "You gave us no choice but war. Now you will learn what humanity does when it has nothing left to lose." She did not fire on the council. She did not need to. The message had already been delivered. The conquered was not invincible. The masters of the stars could bleed. Fleet slowly, fighting their way back through the defensive perimeters. They had lost 19 ships and over 1,000 people, but they had won something far more valuable than any military victory. They had one hope. In the weeks that followed, rebellions erupted across conquered space. Species that had been conquered thousands of years ago suddenly remembered that they had once been free. Slaves who had never known anything but service began to whisper about a better future. The conquered's carefully maintained order began to crumble. Admiral watched the reports with something close to joy. The plan had worked better than she had dared to hope. Satak had not destroyed the conquered. It had done something more important. It had shown the galaxy that destruction was possible. "We cannot win this war alone," told her officers. "We are too few and they are too many, but we do not have to win alone. The conquered has made enemies everywhere. All we had to do was show those enemies that victory was possible." She looked at the holographic display, now crowded with new markers representing rebellions, uprisings, and defections. The blue dots were no longer alone. The entire galaxy was beginning to fight back. Returned to the fleet 2 weeks later. She had been promoted to admiral, the youngest in human history. Her wounds were healing, but the scars would remain forever. Met her in the landing bay. For a long moment the two women simply looked at each other, then smiled. "You did the impossible," she said. Shook her head. "I did what humans have always done. I refuse to accept that something could not be done. The impossible is just another word for not yet." The war was far from over. The conquered was wounded, but it was still dangerous. Thousands of ships still flew under its banner. Trillions of beings still served its will. The elder species would not surrender easily. But something had changed. The galaxy had seen humanity at its best and its most terrifying. They had seen a species that would fly into certain death rather than accept defeat. They had seen warriors who smiled as they burned. And they had learned to hope. The message came on a cold morning, 7 years after the war had begun. Admiral was in her quarters aboard the command ship when her communications officer brought her the transmission. She read it 3 times before she believed it. The Galactic Concord was asking for peace. The great alliance that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, that had destroyed hundreds of species and conquered thousands of worlds, was begging humanity to stop fighting. They offered everything: complete withdrawal from human space, full recognition of human sovereignty, reparations for the damage they had caused, anything as long as the war would end. Sat alone in her quarters for a long time, thinking about what this meant. She thought about the friends she had lost, the ships that had burned, the soldiers who would never come home. She thought about Earth, still empty and dark, waiting for its people to return. She thought about the 8 billion humans who had spent 7 years hiding among the stars, never knowing if they would survive to see another day. Then she called her officers together and told them the news. "They want to surrender," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. "The masters of the galaxy want to give up." The room was silent. Then someone started to laugh. Then another. Soon the entire room was filled with the sound of human laughter, the sound of people who had survived the impossible. But did not laugh. She knew that the hard part was just beginning. The peace conference was held on a neutral station at the edge of known space. It had taken 3 months to arrange. Both sides had sent their best negotiators, their advisors, their most experienced diplomats. The fate of the galaxy would be decided in these talks. Chose to go alone. Her officers protested. They said it was too dangerous. They said she was too important. They said that the Conquered could not be trusted, that this could be a trap, that she should at least bring guards. Refused, she had her reasons. The Conquered delegation was impressive. There were representatives from all 5 remaining elder species, ancient beings who had ruled empires when humanity was still learning to make fire. They wore ceremonial robes and carried themselves with the dignity of those who had never known defeat. But their eyes were tired. Their movements were slow. They looked like people who had been running from a nightmare and had finally accepted that they could not escape. Entered the negotiation chamber alone. She wore her standard uniform, faded and worn from years of war. She carried no weapons, no guards, no symbols of power. She sat down at the table across from creatures who could have ordered her death with a single word. And she smiled. "You could kill me right now," she said. Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. "You have enough guards in this station to destroy a small army. You could end this war with a single shot and claim it was an accident." The Conquered delegates shifted uncomfortably. They had not expected this. "But you will not," continued. "Do you know why?" Silence. The ancient beings who had ruled the stars did not answer. "Because you have finally understood," said. "You have seen what we do when you threaten us. You have watched your ships burn and your stations fall. You have felt fear for the first time in 10,000 years, and now you are wondering something that has never occurred to you before." She leaned forward, her eyes hard as iron. "You are wondering what we would do if you actually succeeded. If you killed me, if you destroyed our fleet, if you hunted down every last human being in the galaxy. You are wondering if that would truly be the end." The lead Conquered delegate, an ancient creature named, finally spoke. His voice was tired, defeated. "We know it would not be the end," he said. "We have studied your history. We have seen what your species does when it faces extinction. You do not give up. You do not surrender. You find ways to survive that we cannot imagine, and then you come back." He looked with something that might have been respect. "We could kill you today. We could destroy your fleet tomorrow. We could spend 1,000 years hunting your people across the galaxy. And at the end of that 1,000 years, some human somewhere would still be planning revenge. We have realized that we cannot destroy you. We can only make peace with you. The negotiations lasted 3 days. The terms were generous, far more generous than anyone had expected. The conquered would withdraw from all human territory immediately. They would pay reparations in resources and technology. They would release all species that wished to leave their alliance. And they would formally recognize humanity as a sovereign power with full rights under galactic law. But was not satisfied. She had one more demand. From this day forward, she said, any species that faces extinction at the hands of the conquered or any other power may petition humanity for protection. If we agree that their cause is just, we will defend them as we have defended ourselves. The conquered delegates protested. This was too much. This would undermine their authority. This would encourage rebellion among their remaining subjects. Listened to their complaints, then she spoke. You built your empire on fear, she said. You conquered because others were afraid to resist. You ruled because others were afraid to rebel. For 12,000 years, you have taught the galaxy that might makes right, that power is everything, that the strong can do whatever they want to the weak. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. We will build something different. We will build an alliance based on hope, not fear. We will show the galaxy that there is another way, that the weak can be protected, that the strong have responsibilities, that power means nothing if it is not used for justice. She turned back to face the conquered delegates. You can accept this or you can continue the war. We have survived 7 years of fighting against everything you could throw at us. We can survive 7 more, or 70, or 700. The choice is yours. The Treaty of Saul was signed the next day. The conquered agreed to every human demand. They had no choice. They had learned at terrible cost that some enemies cannot be defeated. Some enemies can only be respected. As left the station, stopped her. You could have destroyed us, he said. You could have demanded our complete surrender. You could have done to us what we threatened to do to you. Why did you show mercy? Thought about the question for a long moment. Because we are not you, she finally said. We fight to protect, not to conquer. We kill to survive, not to dominate. And when the fighting is done, we remember that our enemies are also living beings with families and hopes and dreams. She looked at with something that might have been pity. That is what you never understood about us. We are not monsters. We are not conquerors. We are simply people who refuse to die. And now that we have survived, we want to build something better, something that will last, something that will make this war mean something. She walked away without looking back. Behind her, the greatest empire in galactic history began the long process of accepting that it was no longer supreme. And somewhere out there, 8 billion humans began the journey home. 20 years had passed since the end of the war. Earth was alive again. The cities that had stood dark and empty were now filled with light and laughter. Children played in parks that had once been silent. Families gathered in homes that had waited 7 long years for their return. But humanity had not forgotten. They would never forget. President stood at the podium of the Galactic Assembly, looking out at the largest gathering of species in history. The hall was massive, built to hold representatives from every civilized world in known space. When the conquered had ruled, only the elder species had been allowed to speak here. Now, beings from over 100 worlds filled the seats, each one with an equal voice. Was 58 years old, with silver hair and calm eyes that had seen both war and peace. She had been a soldier during the Ghost War, then a diplomat during the Reconstruction, and finally the leader her people had chosen to guide them into this new era. She was not the strongest or the most experienced, but she was trusted, and in these uncertain times, trust was the most valuable thing of all. Behind her stood the flags of the United Human Alliance, and beside those flags stood representatives of 37 other species. These were the nations that had chosen to ally themselves with humanity, to stand together against any future threat. They were large and small, ancient and young, different in every possible way except one. They all believed in something better. The conquered believed that fear was the foundation of civilization, said. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the vast hall. They thought that the galaxy could only be ruled through terror. They thought that power came from the ability to destroy, to conquer, to dominate. She paused, letting her words sink in. They were wrong. The former conquered delegates sat in their designated section, a shadow of their former glory. Only 3 of the original 7 elder species remained in the alliance. The others had dissolved their empires, freeing their subject peoples and retreating to their home systems. The great power that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years was now just another voice in the assembly. Fear builds prisons, continued. Fear builds walls. Fear teaches us to hate what is different, to destroy what we do not understand, to strike first before we can be struck. For 12,000 years, the galaxy lived under the shadow of fear. Species conquered and were conquered. Civilizations rose and fell. And through it all, the strong preyed upon the weak. She looked directly at the conquered delegation. We offer something different. Admiral sat in the audience, watching her former subordinate with pride. She had retired from military service 5 years ago, passing command to a new generation of officers who had never known the desperation of the Ghost War. Her hair was completely white now, her body tired from decades of service. But her mind was still sharp, and her heart was still full. She remembered everything. The dark years when humanity had hidden among the stars, the desperate battles against impossible odds, the friends who had died so that others might live, the moment when the conquered had finally admitted defeat. She remembered, and she was proud. We offer partnership, said. We offer friendship. We offer the simple truth that no species, no matter how small or how weak, should face extinction alone. This is the founding principle of the United Alliance. This is what we stand for. The audience stirred. Many of the representatives had come to the Alliance as refugees, fleeing the collapse of conquered space. They had expected to find another empire, another master, another power that would use them and discard them when they were no longer useful. Instead, they had found something they had never imagined possible. They had found equals. But let me be clear, said, and her voice grew harder. This offer of friendship comes with a warning. The Alliance is not weak. We are not soft. We have not forgotten what it means to fight. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of every delegate, human and alien alike. 20 years ago, the conquered threatened humanity with extinction. They gave us a choice between slavery and death. They expected us to surrender. They expected us to beg for mercy. They expected us to be like every other species they had conquered. Her voice rose, carrying the weight of memory and resolve. They were wrong. We did not surrender. We did not beg. We vanished into the darkness and became something the galaxy had never seen before. We became the ghost in the night, the blade in the shadow, the fire that could not be quenched. We fought for 7 years against everything they could throw at us, and we won. The hall was completely silent. Humanity remembers, said. We remember every child who grew up in hiding. We remember every soldier who died far from home. We remember every sacrifice, every tear, every drop of blood that was spilled for our survival. We remember, and we will never forget. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the vast hall. We chose peace because we believe in a better future. We chose mercy because we know that hatred only breeds more hatred. We chose to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than wound, to create rather than conquer. Her eyes found the conquered delegation again. But if anyone threatens what we have built, if anyone tries to repeat the mistakes of the past, if anyone raises their hand against the innocent and the weak. She smiled, and in that smile was the echo of Admiral's iron will, of Commander's impossible victory, of 8 billion humans who had walked into the void rather than surrender. They will find no fear in us, only retribution. The assembly erupted in applause, not just from the human delegates, but from species across the galaxy. Beings who had lived under conquered rule for thousands of years. Beings who had been told that resistance was futile. Beings who had watched humanity stand against the masters of the stars and win. They cheered because they finally believed that the future could be different. They cheered because they had hope. Later that evening, found sitting alone on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The old admiral was watching the sunset, her face peaceful in the fading light. "You did well today," said without turning around. Sat down beside her. "I learned from the best." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to purple to black. Stars began to appear, tiny points of light scattered across the infinite darkness. "Do you think it will last?" asked. "The alliance, the peace, all of it?" Considered the question carefully. "Nothing lasts forever," she said. "Empires rise and fall, treaties are signed and broken, even stars eventually burn out." She turned to look at, and her old eyes were bright with something like joy. "But that is not the point. The point is that we tried. We took a galaxy built on fear and tried to build something better. We showed everyone that another way was possible." She looked back at the stars. "Maybe the alliance will last 1,000 years. Maybe it will fall tomorrow. But what we did, what we proved, that will never be forgotten. Humanity stood against the darkness and refused to yield. We showed the galaxy that courage is stronger than fear, that hope is more powerful than despair, that even the smallest light can push back the night." She smiled. "That is our legacy. That is what we leave to those who come after us. Not an empire, not a throne, just a simple truth that will echo through history forever." She turned too, and her voice was strong despite her years. "When the galaxy threatened humanity, they found no fear, only retribution, and in the end, only hope. The stars burned on, ancient and eternal, witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. And somewhere among them, a small blue planet turned slowly through the night, home to a species that had dared to dream of something better. They had been threatened with extinction. They had answered with defiance. And they had won." The end.